My name is Thea, and I am 35 years old. 3 days after my daughter Luna was born, I was still in a hospital gown, still sore, still learning how to feed a newborn, when my mother-in-law stood in the middle of that room and told everyone present that my baby was not really part of their family. She held Luna at a distance, the way you might hold something you were not sure about, and she said loudly enough for the nurses at the front desk to hear, "This baby cannot be our own blood." My husband Daniel's face went completely still. His sister crossed her arms and smiled to herself, and I smiled back at my mother-in-law, quietly without saying a word, because I am a genetic counselor, and I knew that in 10 days a doctor would walk through that door with results that none of them were prepared for. Luna was born at 2:47 in the morning on a Tuesday, after 14 hours of labor, so difficult I nearly needed surgery. Daniel held my hand, so hard his fingers turned white. When the nurses placed her on my chest, she weighed 6 pounds and 11 ounces and had a full head of dark hair. Daniel was crying before I was. In my work at a large medical center, I spend my days translating complicated science into language that frightened families can actually understand. I read genetic data the way other people read recipes, looking for what is significant and what is simply a variation. I explain results to parents who are sitting in plastic chairs, holding each other's hands, and trying not to fall apart. I have been doing this for 12 years, and in that time, I have learned that our bodies carry truths that do not care whether we are ready to hear them. I did not grow up with advantages. My mother died when I was 9 from an illness that was found too late. After that, it was just me and my father in a small apartment. He drove a delivery truck. I waitressed through school and worked late shifts in a hospital lab while finishing my graduate degree. Everything I have, I built myself one slow year at a time. When Daniel asked me to marry him, I wasn't looking for a big house or a prominent name. I wanted a table where everyone was comfortable and no one was missing. I wanted a family that stayed. I believed, genuinely and completely, that having a baby would make me part of the Caldwell family in a way that nothing else could. I was wrong about that. Diane, my mother-in-law, had been quietly measuring me since the first evening Daniel brought me to her home. I could see it in the way her eyes moved to my shoes when I walked in the pause she allowed after asking where I had gone to school. Her late husband, Robert, had been a circuit court judge. The Caldwell name appeared on hospital plaques and was spoken carefully at church. Robert died 3 years ago from a sudden heart attack, and after that Diane became the sole keeper of the family's reputation, a role she filled with particular intensity of someone who had once been told she wasn't good enough herself. She wore a string of cream pearls with a small gold clasp every single day. She told me once that those pearls passed from mother to daughter-in-law, but only to women who were, as she put it, true blood. She looked directly at me when she said it. She was not being subtle. The first comment came only 4 hours after Luna was born, while Daniel was down the hall getting food. The family arrived together, Diane first, then his sister Brooke and her husband, then Aunt Carol with balloons and her phone already recording. Diane lifted Luna from the bassinet without asking and held her at arm's length, studying her the way you study something at a market before deciding whether to buy it. She said Luna was dark. She told Brooke that Caldwell babies were always fair. Brooke agreed that it was unusual for a newborn to have so much hair. I lay in that bed exhausted and told them my mother had dark hair. That feature skip and resurface. No one responded. Diane placed Luna back in the bassinet like she was returning a library book and said, "We will see." Daniel came back with a sandwich and a wide smile and asked if everyone had met the baby. Brooke said they had. Diane did not look at Luna again for the rest of the visit. That night, I held my daughter in the dark and looked at the small plastic identification band on her wrist that read Caldwell Luna. I thought about my own mother. Losing her at 9 was not just a sad chapter in the story. It was eating breakfast alone. It was learning to braid my own hair from blurry internet videos. It was every school event where I looked for a face in the crowd and didn't find one. When I married Daniel, what I wanted most of my daughter was exactly what I had missed. Grandparents, aunts, a full table, people who would show up. When Diane looked at Luna and said she didn't belong, she was reaching for the one thing I had worked my entire adult life to build. The messages started 2 days after we came home, sent to Daniel, but aimed at me. Diane wrote that babies could sense when a home was unsettled. She mentioned, casually, that it was always better to be certain about paternity, that there was no shame in a test. Daniel thought it was sad. I thought it was a declaration. The rest of the family followed her lead in silence. Cousins stopped responding online. Carol stopped speaking to me directly. Then Daniel's friend Kyle called him, and I heard Daniel's voice shift, asking who had said that, saying it was crazy. When he hung up, he told me Brooke was telling people that my late hours at work meant something other than what they were. I work late because families in crisis do not operate on business hours. Brooke had taken a fact about my job and turned it into a story, and the family was listening. Daniel never doubted me, not once. But the doubt was still present in the room. The way smoke fills a house before anyone admits they're at a fire. He became quieter. He still held Luna with complete tenderness, but I could see him turning things over. One night, he suggested we simply take a paternity test to silence everyone. I told him I shouldn't have to prove my honesty because his mother had decided to question it. He didn't disagree with me, but the suggestion had already landed. That night, I stopped thinking like a hurt wife and started thinking like a professional. A paternity test would confirm Daniel was Luna's father. But Diane had not only questioned paternity. She had said the baby was not their blood at all. That was a different claim, and it gave me a different idea entirely. I called my colleague Naomi, a physician who specialized in genetic testing, and asked her to arrange 2 tests through a secure independent lab, one for Daniel and Luna, and one for Diane and Luna. If Daniel was the father and Diane was not the grandmother, that would mean something significant, and it would not be anything that reflected on me. Diane invited the family to a dinner. She called a Welcome Luna gathering. I knew before we arrived that it was not that. She had seated Daniel and me at the far end of the table near the kitchen, away from the rest of the family. After the meal, she stood and told everyone she felt the loving thing was to request a DNA test. She said, "No test, no name," meaning that without results, Luna would not receive the family name or be included in the inheritance. She expected me to crumble. I took a sip of coffee and said, "Fine, let's do the test." She looked genuinely startled. I told her I had one condition. Since she was so concerned with Caldwell blood, I wanted a test run for her as well, to confirm she was Luna's grandmother. She thought about it for a moment and agreed, saying that the truth had nothing to fear from questions. I told her I agreed completely. The samples were collected and sent to Naomi's lab on a Monday. By Friday, Naomi called and asked me to come to her office. She opened the first folder and told me that Daniel is definitively Luna's father. I felt relief even though I had never doubted it. Then she opened the second folder. She told me that Diane is not Luna's grandmother. The probability was essentially 0. I sat with that for a moment. If Daniel is the father and I am the mother, and Diane is not the grandmother, there's only one explanation. Diane is not Daniel's biological mother. Naomi said it was consistent with a hospital mix-up at birth, which was not uncommon in small facilities decades ago, before rigorous identification protocols existed. Daniel had been born at a rural hospital that no longer operated. I thought about Thanksgiving, about Diane frowning at a childhood photo of Daniel and saying he never really looked like Robert. I thought about how Brooke had Robert's narrow frame and pale eyes, and Daniel was broad and dark-eyed. I thought about a woman who had spent 40 years defending a bloodline that her own son was never actually part of. I told Daniel that evening in our kitchen. I gave him the good news first, and he was relieved and happy. Then I told him the rest. He sat down and was quiet for a long time. He is an engineer. He processes things by sitting with them and working through the logic slowly. He thought about the jokes over the years about not looking like his father. He thought about how he had always felt slightly outside the inner circle of family he grew up in. After a while, he told me we would go to the meeting and let the results speak for themselves. The following Saturday, the family gathered in a hospital conference room. Diane sat at the head of the table, wearing her pearls. She stood and repeated what she had said 3 days after Luna was born. This baby was not their blood. She was completely certain. I thanked her for asking the question. Then Naomi walked in. Naomi told the room that Daniel is Luna's father. The tension in the family's posture softened slightly. Then she told them that Diane is not Luna's grandmother. The room went absolutely silent. Diane said the lab had made an error. I told her the lab was independent, and the results were verified, and that the most likely explanation was a mix-up at the hospital where Daniel was born 40 years ago. I told her this was not something anyone had done to her. It was simply true. I watched her understand it. She had spent 4 decades protecting a legacy, wearing those pearls, drawing lines around who belonged and who didn't, building a wall against a feeling that she herself had once been told she was enough. And now the room she had filled with witnesses to my supposed dishonesty was watching her instead. She sat down slowly. She spoke quietly, almost to herself, about Robert's mother telling her she would never be a real Caldwell, about spending her whole marriage proving otherwise. Then she took off the pearls and set them on the table, and walked out without saying goodbye to her son. The room cleared quickly. Brooke was crying. Carol left without speaking. Daniel and I sat alone with Luna. The pearls remained on the table between us, unclaimed, belonging to no one. In the weeks that followed, Diane stopped returning calls. We're trying to locate the original hospital records, though it will take time. Somewhere there's a person who carries the biological connection Diane spent a lifetime guarding, and they have no idea. Daniel visited his mother and told her he loved her, and that Luna was her granddaughter in every way that mattered, but that she owed me an apology. She was not ready for that. I kept Luna's hospital identification band. It still reads Caldwell, Luna. It reminds me that what our blood carries is only one part of the story. Who we choose to love, who we show up for, who we sit beside in the hard moments. That is the part we actually decide for ourselves.